And good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us for the first virtual learning journey for the Innisfail Energy Hub. My name is Laura McTaggart, and I'm the community mobilizer at the Energy Futures Lab. I've met most of the people in the room, but it's nice to see some new faces as well. And as you may have noticed, this session is being recorded, and this is so that we can share it with those who aren't able to join us live today. If possible, it'd be great for those who are with us in the room if you could keep your microphones turned off so that those who tune in at a later date are able to enjoy their experience. And if you do have any questions that you would like answered in the Q&A later on after both presentations are finished, please feel free to type them in the chat and we'll make sure those are brought up later in the session at the Q&A. And so in the room today, we're really excited to have members from the Innisfail Energy Hub, who are the members of this year's Energy Futures Roadshow. We also have participants joining us from some of our 10 previous Roadshow communities. So really excited for those who are able to join us. I think we have some people joining from Rainbow Lake, Devon, and some of our other communities. Welcome, so happy that you could join us. Today, we are gathering together so that we can share learning moments between the Energy Futures Lab fellows and participants of current and past Energy Futures Roadshows. Today's session, I'm very excited for us to have the chance to learn from Megan and Maggie about Hydrogen 101 and electric vehicle mobility. Stay tuned for upcoming virtual learning journeys. And for those of you who are joining us from Innisfail, please feel free to let us know if there are other topics that you would like to learn about in the future, and we'll do our best to find speakers so that we can learn about that. For those who are new to this year's Roadshow program, you'll notice something a little bit new, the name, the Innisfail Energy Hub. This convening name emerged from our organizing crew from Innisfail, who wanted to have a unique name and identifier that would live on beyond our workshop series together. And so we're in the midst of the year-long working together with Innisfail, and we're expecting our next workshop in person coming up in 2 weeks. And so for those who haven't registered yet, please do so soon. And we look forward to having you in person in Innisfail on November 8th and 9th. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge the land that we are gathered on today. I'm calling in from the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in what we now know as Vancouver. And we are a little bit unique today as we're gathering in virtual space, and we have people joining us from all over. And I do want to acknowledge, even though we don't always think about it, the infrastructure that supports virtual spaces such as this does also have an impact and is located on Indigenous lands. Thank you to those nations from the bottom of my heart who continue to be stewards of those lands and make it possible for us to be able to gather and learn together today. If you are able, I would love if you could type in the chat where you are joining us from today. And I'll pause for a moment for a chance for us to see where we've got people tuning in from. Awesome. So we've got some Calgary, Cochrane, Innisfail. Oh yeah, we've got Fernie. Lots of our Innisfail participants. That's great to see. Grand Prairie, welcome. Great to have you here. Dan, yes, welcome. From Rainbow Lake, great. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. And I'm going to stop my screen share here and introduce our first presenter today. Megan Lohmann is a fellow at the Energy Futures Lab and the Deputy Executive Director at the Community Energy Association, an organization working across Western Canada to accelerate climate and energy initiatives. Megan has been working in the field of climate and energy for 15 years, engaging with local government, industry, public and First Nations on innovative local solutions in response to challenges around energy efficiency, electric mobility, and local greenhouse gas emission reductions, among a variety of other topics. Welcome, Megan. And we're going to get your screen shared going so that we can get your presentation.
Yes, thank you. Can you see it? Okay.
Looks good.
All right, great. Thanks so much. And I'm going to just flip over to the screen so that I can see everyone's faces as well. And I'm going to try and start my timer, but appreciate any prompts that you can give as well. Great. Well, it's really really nice to be here and to be sharing the story of electric mobility, because the story is quite different today than it was when we started talking with communities in Alberta about how they might participate in the e-mobility future. I feel really strongly about the role that small communities, rural communities have to play in this transition toward electric mobility. There's a lot of focus, I find, on urban and highly traveled corridors in terms of how we're building out infrastructure. And you know, it's really on communities to be proactive and collaborate to bring those opportunities to small, medium-sized areas where really, as an EV driver myself, I appreciate the security of knowing that there are charging stations along routes that I want to travel. I'll just start as well with a little bit more about the Indigenous leadership in the e-mobility space. As I mentioned in the chat, I'm located in Tinaha-Makis, which is really the sort of southeast area of British Columbia. Overlaps a little bit into Alberta, and we've had the pleasure of working with both Tinaha and Bearspaw First Nation on installing electric vehicle infrastructure to benefit tourism as well for those communities. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that leadership that has been demonstrated. The top two photos are from the Tinaha Nation, who installed 126 solar panels on their government building, which was tied to a level 2 station downtown Cranbrook. And then at the Kananaskis Travel Center, where we had a Peaks to Prairies network, which I'll speak to in a little bit, fast charger installed. Really, really great location. Lots of tourists already going through that area, but it is on that Bearspaw land. So that was a great partnership. I work for a nonprofit organization, so that's sort of the context that I'm here. Also as a fellow with EFL. This is our bread and butter, really helping local governments, helping communities unlock opportunities for climate and energy. And one of those areas is in transportation and electric vehicle infrastructure, planning, and communications. The work that we've done so far kind of sets the stage for what I'll talk about today. It really has been unlocked by the willingness of communities to collaborate, to think big about the possibility of how a transition toward electric mobility, providing electric vehicle infrastructure can provide many co-benefits to a community. So this map represents all of the communities and initiatives that we're working on or have worked on. The purple there, the network in Northwest Alberta continues to be in the funding phase, and we've gone through a couple of procurement rounds and really trying to dial down cost and partnerships. It's a really exciting one because to me, it connects two major drivable markets, Calgary and Edmonton, over to British Columbia, where we've already got over 60,000 electric vehicles registered and lots of travel happening. So really the emphasis on that and the Southwest Alberta network that's installed called Peaks to Prairies, the impetus for it really was, we want to be connected to the drivable markets. We want to be sort of open for business from an e-mobility perspective in order to draw tourism and be part of that transition, as opposed to trying to catch up and react to it in the future. Right now, many of the communities that aren't connected to an EV network would literally be considered a barrier to an EV driver. And so you'll hear that EV drivers plan their routes based on where the most accessible, reliable stations exist, and that's where they're going to choose to have vacation or travel through en route to another destination. So a lot of work has been done to try to crack the nut of how we support communities in playing a bigger role in this realm. There's a lot of layers when it comes to electric mobility, and I'm not going to dwell on this, but I just want to highlight that, when we get into this conversation, it's impossible to not also talk about the implications of different wire companies, the suppliers that may or may not be keeping up with demand, the policies that need to be layered on in order to support electric vehicle adoption or infrastructure installation in communities, and then the important engagement and communications piece of it. There's also the vehicle technology itself. So when we're talking about electric vehicles in the context of what I'm presenting today, I'm primarily talking about battery electric vehicles. So your pure 100% electric vehicles. We've got plug-in hybrids as well. The Mitsubishi Outlander continues to be a very popular one in that category. What we're not talking about is the sort of original, what we're called hybrids, which is the original Toyota Prius. So there is no ability to externally charge the battery for those vehicles. So that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about those vehicles that rely on an external plug to charge the battery. Really exciting over the last few months has been the deliveries of the F-150 Ford Lightning, which has certainly going to change how quickly I think EVs are adopted, particularly in some of our rural contexts. My organization just took delivery 2 weeks ago, and it is amazing. It's a very fun truck to drive and tows smoother than any of the large trucks we've had towing some of our materials. So really exciting. The other piece of technology, of course, is the charging infrastructure, and this is what I'll speak a little bit more to. Generally 3 levels, although the DC fast charging level goes in many different tiers in terms of the speed of charging. Level 1 is considered just your home plug, plugging into your 110 outlet. It, is a very slow charge for today's batteries. With the F-150, it would take several days in cold weather to refill on a level 1 home charger. So certainly it's not a viable option if you're someone that drives daily. Level 2 charging requires 240 volt. Typically it's 40 to 80 amps. This is what would be most commonly used at home, on work, and in strategic locations where you're going to have several hours of dwell time. They're popular at hockey arenas, swimming pools, recreation centers, where you're maybe there for a day for a tournament or whatever is happening at that facility. And then the third category there is DC fast charging. So this is a anywhere from 50 kilowatt and up. Really, we're seeing a lot more faster stations being installed now. We like to see these installed in convenient locations for kind of the quick stop and go, although not all of them are super quick. I've got also a Kona EV, and I tend to, budget 30 to 45 minutes for my stops when I'm driving my EV and stopping at fast chargers. They're really great for sort of that highway corridor charging infrastructure, or areas where maybe you've got an opportunity to have a quick charge co-located with some level 2s. I want to highlight that Innisfail is is adopting EVs and hosting infrastructure already. These are just a few photos from around Alberta, but the middle one, your Model E ice resurfacer, which hopefully is working well for you. And then Equus has installed a fast charger co-located with a solar install at their facility in Innisfail. So that's the top right photo there with the F-150 plugged in. Some other examples around the province, we've got Petro-Canada has invested across Highway 1, and that's just the branding of their station in the lower left. We've got buses coming in. Calgary's taking receipt of their order this fall, I understand, for their battery electric buses as well. And then the top left is in Lethbridge, an example of a station that's an example of a Tesla that's using a station with an adapter. In 2016, when we started to work with communities on the EV charging network, this was what it looked like. This map is from plugshare.com, which is a publicly accessible network mapping app. You can see the cluster, the green is level 2 and the orange is fast charging. The cluster of level 2 in the urban center, and then essentially nothing in the rest of the area. This was from a presentation way back then, so I unfortunately can't show the entire province, but I wanted to take a similar screenshot. This is today, what the network looks like. And this is a dramatic transformation. You know, maybe not as fast as some people want and not everywhere that we'd like to see charging, but I just want to emphasize the difference in that, what is that now, like 6 years, the transformation that has taken place. And this is both due to the investments that communities have made around this infrastructure, but also private sector. You can certainly see a concentration around main corridors, main highway corridors across both Alberta and BC, and then up Highway 2, although lots of room for improvement, because certainly we need to try and stay ahead of demand and not have lineups and poor experiences at charging stations. I really, want to encourage communities to take a bolder vision around how the space of electric mobility generally, not just vehicles, but micro e-mobility. So whether that's e-bikes for commuting, scooters, though not appropriate for every community, but also how we can start to think a little bit more creatively around what the future looks like for e-mobility in terms of technologies like bidirectional. So being able to flow energy from your vehicle into a building, how we can better manage load across a community by having smart panels or at least smart charging in our homes, so that what we're rolling out does not create challenges in terms of grid capacity. There are solutions, and it's a matter of talking with the utilities and with the energy companies that are digging into this and applying it in your community. When it comes to that opportunity, so both that bolder, longer-term vision and also today's opportunity, it's very easy to pick a location in a community or in a highway corridor that's lower cost to install because there's available power perhaps, or a convenient pullout on the side of the road. As you're talking about your role in the e-mobility ecosystem, I'd really encourage the communities to consider how to optimize the infrastructure for the co-benefits for your community. So how can you site them strategically to draw people into a downtown core, or to, again, a tourism or recreational attraction, or where there will be benefit to small businesses by having, someone's attention for 30 to 40 minutes or even longer. This is sort of the general elements that we look at when we're considering siting, and we try to apply this across a network so that it is a reliable, enjoyable, and safe experience for drivers. I include this picture on the right because we cited a station co-located level 2 and fast charger in downtown Pincher Creek, and literally the day that we cut the ribbon, this Tesla from Rosebud, Alberta, drove down because they saw this station on the map light up. that it had been turned on, and that day they went and said, okay, we're going to book a B&B, we're going to have a nice dinner out, enjoy recreation in the area. And it couldn't have been better because the mayor and councillors were there who were on the fence as to how good this was actually going to be for the community. And within minutes of cutting the ribbon, someone had gone because it was a destination to go in their EV. So that's really the, what I want to emphasize, the opportunity around well-designed, well-sited infrastructure. In terms of local government, and there may be some of you, I just want to add this in because there are other ways that you can enable this shift toward electric mobility in your communities. There's policy that can be established within your community, or at least voluntary policy, I suppose, if it's outside of the realm of a building code, for example, encouraging at-home charging or encouraging redevelopments to incorporate EV readiness, meaning you've got parking stalls that are, if there's a redevelopment or a parking lot being redone, integrate wiring for future-proofing for electric vehicle charging into those facilities. There's also a lot of leadership that can be demonstrated from communities by adopting electric vehicles yourself, installing workplace charging, and charging for fleet. I'm going to go back to the bold vision element because this is what really gets me excited for communities when we start to think about electric mobility, not just as a station to facilitate charging in your community, but as a way to support social convening and community space. This, of course, is a lot of funding that would have to be established for this, but the concept of this model that we've established as that social EV charging as a social convening is something that we want communities to start to think about. So how do you draw people into, let's say, a downtown core, park at a level 2 charging station or a fast charger, hop on an electric bike car share, experience the community, explore the community, have convening space there. Perhaps you're a commuter that can store your e-bike in charged units during the day while you're at work. Perhaps you integrate an electric bus stop where there could be super fast charging for transit. And again, integrate these spaces so that you're maximizing even the cost around electrical extension. That tends to be one of the biggest barriers when we go to ideal locations is, the 3-phase power doesn't happen to be there, or the capacity on the transformer is limited. So starting to think strategically about how you might integrate different elements of the e-mobility ecosystem in your community to bring greater co-benefits. We've done similar designs looking at co-locating workspaces. So if I'm pulling up to I'll use an example, driving from Fernie to Calgary. If I know I've got a Zoom meeting at noon, I will strategically arrive in Nanton, plug in. Their library I know has free Wi-Fi and a private office that I can hop into and use. The more of those opportunities that we can support that transition to electric mobility by providing those co-benefits and opportunities to enjoy your dwell time, the better. And as an EV driver, that's certainly what I seek out. So integrating those spaces into community. Just with my remaining couple of minutes, I just want to give a really quick example of how we've done this. Not the big vision e-mobility hub, but the collaborative approach to establishing an electric vehicle network. These are all the partners from our Peaks to Prairies initiative, which finished 3 years ago. We had a number of communities come forward through the local REDAs, Regional Economic Development Associations. The project impacted over 50 communities across Southern Alberta. And the idea was to essentially fill the gaps of areas that were not being invested in by private sector. It's not a great business case to have fast charging in a small rural community because of the overhead costs, the demand charges, and the capital costs. And so we thought that we would bring a whole bunch of communities together to try and make that business case a little bit better for a private sector partner to help facilitate. as well as attracting public funding, which we were successful in doing. In the end, the project was just over $2 million. We were able to connect over 1,400 kilometers of highway. We strategically sited the stations to complement a similar network that had been completed in Southeast British Columbia, so that even across provincial borders, it was a smooth network. We worked with Montana as well during this process to make sure, as they're designing their network, that we were complementing cross-border with the US. So they're now rolling out their plan. It was 3 years of consistent and regular communication with the state to make sure that everyone was aware as to how we were lining our stations up against the border. We ended up going out to RFP and partnering with ATCO, who are the owner and operator of the network now. As part of that RFP, we wanted secure credits to local renewable energy for the length of the project timeframe, which would be 10 years. And they now purchase renewable energy credits from Southern Alberta. So that was a very localized kind of requirement that we put in to the RFP. Unfortunately, COVID hit a year after all the stations, or not even a year, months after all the final station was turned on. So we certainly had a crash in the number of stations used. That has skyrocketed since, and we are seeing record usage across the entire network. Even in communities like Little Milk River near the border, it's now being used as an avenue for folks to get south that own EVs. We're shifting to the north now, and I'm going to leave it at this just to celebrate this collaboration that was established through a messy process, which EFL helped us to facilitate through similar collaborative processes that folks on this call have been part of. And what it's resulted in is this opportunity to electrify this corner of the province, connecting those drivable markets, as I mentioned, and bringing co-benefits to these communities. I'll leave it at that. I could go on forever, as I warned Laura and Julie, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Megan. I've watched your presentation before, but I learned something new today. So I welcome if anybody wants to share a clap reaction or any other reaction, just on the bottom of your screen, the reactions button, feel free to pick one or put your hands up. Thank you so much, Megan. I really enjoyed that, and I hope everyone else did too. And so again, thank you for those who have been typing their questions in the chat. We'll get to those at the end of the session for our Q&A. And I'm gonna go right away into introducing Maggie. And so Maggie Hanna is an Energy Futures Lab fellow and the president of Common Ground Energy, and has 40 years of experience in energy resources exploration and most recently innovation. Her work is to provide a current read on relevant energy transition innovations and developments that encompass scientific, technological, commercial, social, policy, regulatory, economic, business model, and environmental aspects, along with approximate timelines. She has a broad understanding of worldwide energy systems and a strong grounding in systems thinking. Most recently, Maggie has been engaged as a speaker and writer on the energy transition, with a special focus on the hydrogen economy. Welcome, Maggie. I think you're muted still, Maggie.
Ha, got it. Hi, everybody. I just want to say it's great to be with you here virtually, and it's lovely to see so many familiar faces also from past roadshows. So I just want to start by saying that the 21st century transition really is upon us, like it or not, and all energy transitions are messy, and this one is no exception. And it's important to understand that there's no such thing as clean energy production. All energy sources, I mean all, have a resource and carbon footprint of some kind or other. So it's a matter of knowledgeable trade-offs as we build this decarbonized energy system of the future. And and it's got to be robust, and robustness means being able to tolerate shocks. So in the coming decarbonized energy system, it means having, in my view, decentralized energy backup plans for power and fuel A, B, C, and D from a variety of sources that are automatically kick in to maintain energy on demand. And that means without suffering, like when the power goes off or so, there's no suffering. And it also means not devolving into only energy only as available as well. Resilience seems like a good thing, but on the other hand, it means being resilient means that when shocks happen, we are affected, we suffer, but we bounce back quickly as well. So robustness is better than resilience. Any one source may not be all that efficient, like wind and solar, but when we put these things together with other energy sources, with other qualities of how long they last and how fast they turn on and all of those things, when we set up a system like that, the overall effect can be robust energy system that maintains energy on demand. So this energy transformation or transition or evolution or revolution, call it what you want, will all be accomplished only with contributions from a wide variety of energy sources and facilitators and ways to move energy around. So how does hydrogen fit into all of that? That's the question that we're going to be talking about today. Can everybody hear me good? And we're all good?
Sound great, Maggie.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how to make this go to my next slide because the buttons are not showing up. One second. Okay, here we go. So let's start. What is hydrogen anyway? Not everybody in the room is the sciencey type. You gifts lie elsewhere. So let's start with the basics and build from there. Hydrogen is the smallest element we have. The red arrow points to its location on the periodic table, position number 1. It is built from 1 proton and 1 electron. But we generally write the chemical formula for hydrogen as H2. And that's because it always shows up as 2 atoms bonded together into a molecule of hydrogen. And the energy in a molecule of hydrogen is actually stored in the hydrogen bond in between the 2 hydrogen atoms. And that's marked by a purple arrow. When we break that bond, we release energy for our use. This is what hydrogen looks like in the universe through a telescope. This is a nebula. Approximately 73% of the mass of the visible universe is in the form of hydrogen. Helium makes up about 25%, and everything else we know and love represents only 2% of the mass of the universe. So hydrogen, however, there's very little, relatively little free hydrogen roaming around on Earth. About half a part per billion actually is what it is in the atmosphere. So most of the hydrogen we have is tied up in ocean water, in water. We have to use energy to make hydrogen, and it's not an energy source, it's an energy carrier. And hydrocarbons, now let's look at hydrogen with respect to hydrocarbons. Like hydrocarbons really are an amazing set of molecules. They are energy dense, they transport easily, they store well for a really long time, they're relatively affordable. But they have this unintended consequence of pooping CO2 off into the atmosphere as we have burned them to build our societies for about the last 250 years. And burning hydrocarbons for various things accounts for the lion's share of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today, about 62%. We are currently at about 150% of pre-industrial levels of atmospheric CO2. Now, here are some hydrocarbon chemical structures. The first 3 molecules represent coal on the left, which is the most carbon intense, and then oil, which is second most, and then natural gas, third from the left, which is also third the amount of carbon that gets put in the atmosphere per gigajoule. So we burn these things for energy, and we put the resulting CO2 off into the atmosphere. But where does the energy actually come from in these hydrocarbon molecules? And mostly, again, that they come from the hydrogen bond itself. And so when we break the hydrogen bond by burning the hydrocarbons, we release energy for our use. So why switch to hydrogen? Shown with the red arrow, it's because there's no carbon in it. When we break that bond, hydrogen bond for energy, there's no CO2 emissions that result. Only water is produced when we burn pure hydrogen. And as a little factoid here, 1 kilogram of hydrogen delivers about the same amount of energy as 1 US gallon of gasoline. In a Toyota Mirai, 1 kilogram of hydrogen makes that car go about 100 kilometers down the road. So how do we make hydrogen? And what are the life cycle carbon footprints? Well, today, 95% of all hydrogen we make is gray and brown, shown by the last 2 bars on the far right. Gray hydrogen is made from methane and water, while pumping the CO2 again off into the atmosphere. It releases about 9 to 13 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. Brown, made by coal gasification, releases 15 to 25 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen, and both of these are high. Notice the orange line though, at the 4.4 kilogram level that goes across the whole chart. And anything below this line meets the European Union certified standard definition of low carbon hydrogen. So 3 methods on the left are consistently below that line. Pink hydrogen is made from nuclear electricity and electrolysis, and it has a life cycle footprint of about 1 to 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. The green bar represents both wind and solar. Wind is about the same as nuclear. It's a little higher, but it rounds down to 1 to 2. And solar is higher at 3 to 4. And blue hydrogen, using a 90% carbon capture and utilization and storage, comes in at about 2 to 3 kilograms. But if we include fugitive methane emissions that escape from the supply chain for natural gas, and we must, then the number is 2 to 4. So turquoise is pyrolysis of methane, making solid carbon black instead of CO2 gas. And white is waste industrial hydrogen byproduct that can be retrieved instead of burned up the stack, like from the chlor-alkali plant just west of Red Deer. Yellow is electrolysis done from a mixed grid electricity, and it can have the widest range of carbon intensities depending on how clean your grid is. So to be thorough, there are other ways to make hydrogen. However, they're not yet in significant use, I would say. Okay, so now that we know how to make hydrogen, let's look at this graphic. You can see what we're going to use it for. So the green boxes on the upper left represent what we just talked about, green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. And next is what we might use it for in the yellow boxes around to the right. So these uses are best done with hydrogen and not electricity, in my opinion. And they include things like powering fuel cells to provide heat and power, or even backup power to commercial and public buildings like hospitals. Energy system management means storing hydrogen as seasonal backup for the winter. Other industrial processes besides agriculture for fertilizers over on the left there, but other processes include things like making steel and cement, ceramics and glass, and other high heat industrial things that we do. And heavy distance transportation of all sorts, including freight trucks, buses, planes, trains, ships, and agricultural machinery as well. So in the future, if we get this right, the light's still going to come on when you flip the switch, but what's behind the scenes is going to look pretty different. So let's turn now to the benefits of hydrogen as an energy storage medium. The secret to running any electricity grid is balance. So for every electron we take out, another one is added in real time. And that's not easy, especially when the grid is driven by intermittent power sources like wind and solar. And you might also know that electricity from wind and solar projects around the world is often curtailed. And that's a fancy word for saying it's grounded and wasted because there's no room for it on the grid without disrupting this balance. So we need a way to store excess energy to use later instead of wasting it. And at other times, there's not enough wind or solar available to meet demand. So we have to have some kind of firm or stored energy that we can rely on anytime we need to balance grid supply and demand. And even though we're going to be, electrifying everything we can in this next 3 decades, batteries can't scale to store grid amounts of electricity we need for very long. So case in point, here's a photo of Elon Musk's $40 million worth of 100 megawatt batteries in South Australia. And it's used to balance the grid by keeping the frequency content steady so the grid doesn't crash. And which it does, remarkably well. But what if we called on it to actually power the grid all by itself? It would last about 7 minutes. Batteries are best used on a millisecond to second kind of power balancing short-term solution. Hydrogen offers a much more diverse, more energy dense, longer lasting storage solutions, I would say. And I just noticed that you guys probably can't see my face when I'm talking, so I'm trying to make that change. Can you put me on, because when I put it on single, I get you, Laura. Can you put me on there? So next slide. There's a toolbox of energy storage, right? Here's a little more detail about that. So this slide is from Nel Hydrogen out of Norway, and they make hydrogen electrolyzers and fueling stations. This graph plots the amount of electricity that can be stored on the vertical axis on the left-hand side against how long electricity can be stored for on the horizontal axis. And I'm just going to get rid of this, I guess. So this graph, both axes are roughly logarithmic, I would say. And so the best place to be on this graph is in the upper right corner, where large amounts of energy can be stored for a really long time. And this is where hydrogen resides in purple. Pumped hydro and compressed air might be better than hydrogen for short-term energy storage, but it's really only hydrogen that can store large amounts of energy for seasons to years. Let's visit a common concern that engineers and efficiency wonks have and often voice about hydrogen. They challenge the value of hydrogen as an energy storage medium because it is so energy lossy. And they're right, it is. You lose a lot of the energy when you make hydrogen and when you use it for making power. So for example, if we're looking at storing green electricity as green hydrogen for a second, when we convert electricity to hydrogen, from water and use a fuel cell to turn it back into power again, we lose almost half of the original energy. Now that does not sound like a really good deal, but it really is. We can do so many things with hydrogen that we just can't do well with electricity, including heating applications. Some industrial applications but especially storing large amounts of energy for the winter. And that's what makes it worth it. So here's my analogy. Electricity is like milk and hydrogen is like cheese. It takes a lot of milk to make a little bit of cheese. Milk doesn't store for very long, days, weeks in the fridge, but neither does electricity. But cheese stores for seasons to years. In fact, cheese gets better with age. And hydrogen stores that long too, although I don't think it gets better with age. And besides, they do different but very necessary things, like you wouldn't want to put milk on your pizza, and you wouldn't want to have to rely on only green electricity all by itself to heat your home in the winter. So what about safety? Well, people often say to me, what about the Hindenburg? Look at how many people died. 35 of 97 people on board died. So let's look at safety using hydrogen. The Hindenburg was a hydrogen-filled, lighter than air ship, a dirigible, that had crossed the Atlantic Ocean 34 times at a time when no other aircraft was capable of flying so far. And on the 35th voyage, it was forced to go around a major storm, which meant an extra day in the air before landing. And when dropping the anchor line to tie it down, and when they were coming in for a landing, a combination of the highly flammable aluminum-based paint, highly flammable, on the skin, and the built-up static electricity from the crossing, and perhaps from being near that storm for all we know, a spark traveled up the line once it touched the earth, onto the dirigible. It lit the skin on fire, and the skin ignited the hydrogen. A better question to ask is, why did so many people live? 62 out of 97 people lived, and they survived because hydrogen is just so darn light. It just went straight up and from where the people were, and they were in the enclosure below the dirigible. That firestorm was over in 40 seconds. And just have a look at that. Like that fire just went straight up. Now, the Hindenburg has a sister ship that preceded it. It was called the Graf Zeppelin. And that dirigible flew more than 1.6 million kilometers for nearly a decade on hydrogen before being grounded after the Hindenburg disaster. So let's look at cars for hydrogen safety. These set of images are from a study done by the US National Highway and Transportation Safety Administration. And basically the hydrogen, the pictures are like a pair of cars, and the hydrogen fuel cell car is on the left, and the gasoline fueled car is on the right of each set. So this experiment compares a hydrogen storage tank leak fire with a gasoline tank leak fire. Now, which one do you think is safer? I'd say the hydrogen. The hydrogen flame went straight up. It did not damage the car at all. Whereas the gasoline fire eventually consumed the whole vehicle. I would rather be in a hydrogen car. Hydrogen is so light that if you release it like just one time and then blink one time in 1 second, it's already up 6 stories. So solution by dilution is really fast in an open space, both vertically especially, but also laterally with hydrogen. And it will still explode in an enclosed space. So just like natural gas, let's not do that. So we have taken a look at quite a few of the plus points for hydrogen listed on the left. And now let's look a little deeper at some of the sticky bits that are listed on the right. Let's start with numbers 2 and 3. Hydrogen is a weird gas. It has these weird van der Waals forces that makes it very difficult and costly to compress. And we need to compress it if we want to put it in a pipeline or put it in a tank, but it can be done. And it just takes more energy and more money to do that. So this also makes storing hydrogen in large volumes costly. And one of the solutions is to store hydrogen underground in washed out salt caverns where you have the right geology. The industrial heartland is famous for its salt caverns, storing all manner of like flammable liquids. You know, they have like 70 or something salt caverns there. Let's look at number 5. Hydrogen is currently more expensive as a fuel for combustion than natural gas. Now, it makes sense to move a car or a vehicle with it, but I don't think it makes sense to heat your home with it. And this is why. Natural gas is $3.50 a gigajoule. That's an amount of energy. But if we add escalating carbon taxes to natural gas, for every 10 bucks per ton of CO2 adds about 50 cents to the cost of our natural gas per gigajoule. So that's, you know, that the consumers pay. So 170 bucks a ton in carbon tax on CO2 puts natural gas at about 11 bucks and 50 cents a gigajoule, which is about the price of blue hydrogen at its Alberta's production cost of $1.60 a kilogram. Now, the issue with decarbonizing space heating is that hydrogen is probably better than the alternatives, unless one is in a moderate climate, and then heat pumps work efficiently. Now, I'm in favor of cold weather heat pumps, which are purported to be effective down to -28 Celsius now. They're just new. And they say that, but I would, in my own house, I would like to see backup to that, because we can get down to -40 here pretty easily. I would need a hydrogen to burn in a furnace, or natural gas to burn in a furnace, or hydrogen in a fuel cell to make heat and power for me. And natural gas, you know, is what I have plumbed into the house. So that's probably the direction that I will go, because that will back up the heat pump. You know, we talked about backup plans A, B, C, and D, right? That's what we have to do.
This
So
is
number
a
8.
gentle time check, Maggie.
A gentle time check. All right, we're getting close, my darling. Number 8, liquid hydrogen is called LH2, and it takes a lot of power to make it. And I'm not a fan of liquefying hydrogen for shipping it across the ocean. Having said that, a few months ago, Australia delivered its first load of LH2 to Japan, and bottom line is that it costs $3.50 per kilogram of hydrogen to liquefy it. You have to take it down to like 21 degrees this side of absolute zero, and space is at 4. So ammonia is another way of moving hydrogen, but it's highly toxic. I would like to see in the future we move hydrogen as LNG, as liquid natural gas. So I think I'm going to skip number 12, market chicken and egg problem. And just to say that hydrogen behaves differently than what we're used to. In fact, the actual use of hydrogen is no better or no worse than any other flammable fuel that we use. You just have to know the rules when you're working with hydrogen. It's a little different. But low carbon hydrogen does hold an absolutely key place in our decarbonized energy systems. And I think it's likely to be 25 to 35% of global energy use by 2050, if we get it right. So now you have some sense of the ins and outs of how hydrogen can fit into our modern lives. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow me on Twitter if you like. And if you know someone who suffers from climate anxiety or despair, be sure to check out my work to remedy that. It's a Patreon blog called How the Future Can Go Really, Really Well. Just look it up. Also, you know, if you just want to pick my brain anytime, just contact me and we'll arrange that. So thank you for your kind attention.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maggie. And
it was a lot in a little bit of time, I know.
Yeah, I know for both you and Megan, I'm sure we could have doubled the time and there still would have been more to talk about. But once again, I welcome everyone in the chat to put any reaction or any comments. And I'm gonna vocalize 2 questions that were shared today. We've taken note of everything that everybody asked, and if it makes sense, we'll follow up on those questions. But I'm gonna start with a question that was raised for Megan. I'm gonna circle back to you first. And this was a question from Jean on, what are the latest charging times available today? And do you have any projections on the acceleration of the technology to reduce times?
Yeah, I was just typing up an answer, but it'll be faster to do it this way. So, I mean, it's less about the technology to reduce times and more about the battery vehicle, to be honest. So I can pull up to a super fast, 200 kilowatt charger. I cannot ever get that speed of charging because of the battery in my Kona EV. So as our batteries for the vehicles increase in their capacity, the faster charging infrastructure will be able to deliver a charge in a shorter amount of time. So it's a difficult question to answer because the technology is out there. We've got Electrify Canada. They've got stations that are super fast, like the 150 and 250 kilowatt chargers, but there's not a lot of vehicles out there that accept that rate of charge at this point. So it's a little bit of a challenging one to give a clear answer to, but I think generally what we're seeing is vehicles being produced with much larger battery capacity and charging stations being built with much faster and higher power delivery time. So over time, the scenario will improve. I wouldn't, it's also not the end game. Having fast chargers everywhere is not necessarily what we need for this transition. It's also about accommodating home charging, which is 80% of the charging that an EV driver does, and looking, as Maggie was saying, about how to decentralize energy management, really. I'd love to see that on a neighborhood scale, how we're managing load across homes that are installing home charging, but certainly the fast charging is necessary for that security and long distance, but home charging is, home and workplace is the most heavily used type of charging.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for that question. And I'll finish today with one more question. And this is for Maggie. And this also comes from Mayor of Innisfail, Honorable Jean Barclay, on, and it is, Maggie, to accomplish the vision you speak about, what will it take? For example, government investment, infrastructure build out, converting heating systems to accommodate hydrogen, etc. We see lots of news around the hydrogen hub in Edmonton area, and I believe Southern Alberta is also engaged in building a hub. So I know that's a big question, but as best you can, Maggie, I'd love to hear your insights on that. And I think you're still muted, Maggie.
I'm just famous for that. So it's really true. In Canada, we really have this great vision, this great, the carbon tax has been put in, the emission reduction targets have been set, but what we're missing is the techno-economic rollout of policy and regulations and support and financial support, government investment into these kinds of things that all have to come together in order to make things really robust. And CCUS, I'm a fan of the U in the CCUS more than I am a fan of CCS in the ground, because that carbon dioxide, in my view, that we're going to be, we're going to be using it to build society. We're going to be it's valuable. And then we have some technologies now that can change that into structured carbon that has super strong, has great electrical properties, and can improve about 60% of everything that we use every day. So I'm really thinking that that's what needs to happen. And Jean, just to give you some hope, our mutual friend Bentley Allen is currently working on the techno-economic strategy for Canada for all of these things. So that'll, we'll see that in 8 months to a year. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Maggie. And again, thank you for that question. And
A great question.
yeah, more to come. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today for this session. And for those watching this recording after the fact, thank you so much. And I also just want to say a huge thank you to Megan and Maggie for taking time out of your day and to share some of the wonderful work and knowledge that you have with all of us. So without further ado, thank you everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and stay tuned for our next learning journey sessions, and information will be coming soon to your emails. So have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for
Bye.
showing up. And Megan,